If you're ready to rest, you're in the right place. Close your eyes, relax your body, and drift into a slower time. If you thought the bread aisle in your local supermarket was overwhelming, wait until you hear about the medieval bread bonanza. Back in the Middle Ages, bread wasn't just a staple, it was a social status symbol, an everyday necessity, and occasionally a health hazard. The medieval world was basically a gluten-infested Game of Thrones, where the type of loaf you munched on could make or break your social standing. Let's start with the rock stars of the bread world, the white bread loaves known as manchet in medieval England. White bread was the medieval equivalent of rolling up to a feast in a horse-drawn Bentley. This fluffy delight was made from the finest wheat flour, meticulously sifted to remove the bran. Only the upper crust of society could afford this luxury. If you were gnawing on a manchet, you were likely rubbing elbows with the nobility, or at least pretending to. Imagine a peasant trying to pass off a manchet as their own. It's like showing up at a peasant fair with a Rolex claiming you found it in a haystack. Why this bread snobbery, you ask? Because in medieval times, bread wasn't just something you ate, it was a breadwinner in the economy. Grain was the lifeblood of medieval agriculture, with wheat being the golden child. The economics of grain production were as tangled as a knight's chainmail after a long day on horseback. The amount of land required to grow enough wheat for a year's supply of bread was substantial. In 1300, it took about 3 acres to support a single peasant family with their grain needs. That's right, acres plural. And if the weather didn't cooperate? Well, you might end up with a crop failure, and let's just say medieval folks didn't have the luxury of refrigerated trucks to bring in emergency bread from the next town over. On the other end of the spectrum was the commoner's bread, which was more like something you'd use to build a house than eat. This was maslin, or cheat bread, made with a mix of wheat and rye or barley. It was dense, dark, and probably doubled as a blunt weapon in a pinch. Maslin bread was the medieval version of a budget car functional, but nobody was bragging about it. It was what you ate when you couldn't afford to sift your flour through silk. The bread hierarchy didn't stop there. Below maslin was rye bread, consumed by the poorest of the poor. This was more like eating a bit of brick than a loaf. For those truly scraping the barrel, there was horse bread, made from whatever grains and legumes could be found. Talk about a rough meal, even horses might have turned their noses up at it. Bread wasn't just a dietary staple, it was a barometer of social status. The kind of bread you ate could tell others exactly where you stood in the medieval pecking order. Lords and ladies would never be caught dead with a slice of maslin on their plates. The very real fear of being associated with common bread was akin to today's social faux pas of being caught with a knockoff designer handbag at a high society event. The economics of bread also played a critical role in social and political stability. Grain prices were volatile, and in times of shortage, the price of bread skyrocketed. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it could lead to starvation and civil unrest. Picture a medieval peasant uprising, pitchforks in hand, demanding cheaper bread, a real-life let-them-eat-cake moment, minus the cake and with a lot more grumbling stomachs. So next time you bite into a piece of artisanal sourdough, take a moment to appreciate not just the flavour, but the history. Bread in the Middle Ages wasn't just food, it was life, death, and social hierarchy rolled into one. It was a time when a loaf could decide your fate, and a crumb could mean the difference between a satisfied belly and a night of hunger. And that, my friends, is how bread became the true king of the medieval world, reigning over all with a yeasty fist. So, we've established that bread was the medieval equivalent of a status update, but let's shift gears from the carb-heavy realm of loaves to the savoury world of medieval street snacks. If you thought medieval folks were too busy jousting and feasting to enjoy a quick bite, think again. Welcome to the medieval version of fast food, meat pies. These culinary delights were as ubiquitous as they were mysterious, and yes, sometimes scandalous. Picture the bustling streets of the medieval town, not exactly what you'd call a Michelin-starred dining scene, but vibrant in its own chaotic way. Street vendors lined the narrow, muddy alleyways, hawking their wares with the fervour of modern-day infomercial hosts. Among the cacophony of voices and the pungent aroma of various foods, you'd find stalls selling the medieval version of fast food, the humble meat pie. Forget the golden arches, this was the original quick meal on the go, wrapped in flaky pastry. Now, before you imagine a succulent beef, Wellington, let's set the record straight. Medieval meat pies were more mystery than meat. In fact, the contents could be as ambiguous as a politician's promise. While some pies might generously be filled with pork, beef, or mutton, others were more of a culinary lottery, with ingredients that could include anything from offal to roadkill. Yes, you heard that right. The term "everything but the kitchen sink" was practically invented by medieval pie makers. But why such questionable ingredients? Economics, my dear Watson. Good cuts of meat were as coveted as a royal title, often reserved for the upper classes. For the everyday Joe, or Johann in this case, pies were a way to stretch limited resources. You see, meat was expensive like. Sell your cow to afford a roast. Expensive. A sheep could set you back about 6 pence, roughly equivalent to several days' wages for a labourer. So, for those looking to fill their bellies on a budget, pies were the way to go. The pastry casing served a dual purpose. Not only did it keep the contents warm, but it also discreetly hid whatever questionable bits lurked inside. In the bustling markets, these pies were sold alongside other savoury delights, like fritters and pasties, all conveniently designed for on-the-go consumption. Marketplaces in medieval cities were the medieval version of a food court, though perhaps a bit more chaotic and aromatic. Take London's Cheapside or Paris's Les Halles, where you'd find everything from live chickens to fine silk, all being peddled with vigour. The scenes were as colourful as they were chaotic, with vendors shouting over each other to attract customers, their voices mingling with the clatter of hooves and the occasional bray of a donkey. Street food had the kind of appeal that transcended social class. Everyone from the burger to the beggar indulged. The convenience was unmatched, especially in an era where cooking could consume as much time as a Game of Thrones marathon. But street food wasn't just about feeding the masses, it was a microcosm of medieval life, a place where different classes and cultures intersected. Yet, despite their popularity, meat pies and their kin weren't always greeted with enthusiasm. Health standards were, to put it mildly, non-existent. It's not like the local health inspector was stopping by with a checklist and a thermometer. Food poisoning was a very real risk, and given the lack of modern medicine, it could be as lethal as a sword fight. Eating a meat pie was as much a gamble as rolling dice in a tavern, and with similar odds of survival. Of course, the medieval penchant for pies wasn't just about economics or convenience. There's an undeniable romance to the idea of the street vendor, the scent of baking pastry mingling with the fresh air, a sensory time machine that connects us to our ancestors. But we shouldn't let the romance overshadow the gritty reality. Street vendors worked long hours for scant rewards, often at the mercy of the weather and fickle customers. And while the pies might have been a cheap meal, they were also a symbol of urban survival, a reminder of the daily hustle required just to put food on the table. In all this, there was an economic dance at play, a balancing act between supply and demand, quality and cost, survival and enjoyment. And just as bread was more than sustenance, so too were the meat pies more than mere snacks. They were a lens through which we can view medieval society, its ingenuity, and its struggles. As we delve deeper into the world of medieval markets, we uncover not just the foods, but the people and stories behind them. Merchants who travelled vast distances to bring exotic spices, bakers who rose before dawn to knead dough, and pie makers who deftly navigated the fine line between culinary delight and digestive disaster. All of them played a part in the vibrant tapestry of medieval life, each bite of pie a testament to their efforts. So, next time you're tempted by a modern meat pie, consider the history baked into each crust, and the legacy of street food that stretches back centuries. In the world of medieval snacks, every pie tells a story, and sometimes it's as savoury as the filling, or as surprising as its contents. As we shift our focus from savoury pies to the sugary realm of medieval confections, brace yourself for a journey that's as sticky as it is sweet. If you thought the medieval sweet tooth was just a minor craving, think again. Sweets weren't just treats. They were a status symbol, a luxurious indulgence that separated the haves from the have-nots faster than you can say sugar rush. Let's start with honey, the medieval sweetener of choice. Long before sugar took centre stage, honey was the nectar of the gods, or at least the nectar of those who could afford it. Beekeeping was a revered craft, and honey was as precious as gold. In fact, in some parts of Europe, honey was used as a form of currency. Picture a medieval accountant balancing the books with a jar of honey. It sounds sweet, but it was serious business. Now, if you're imagining medieval folks drizzling honey on everything from porridge to roast chicken, you're not far off. But honey wasn't just for drizzling, it was the star ingredient in a host of confections. Take the honey cake, for instance, a dense, spiced delight that was as much a treat as it was a caloric powerhouse. Or marchpane, a precursor to marzipan, which was essentially ground almonds and honey, moulded into elaborate shapes to impress dinner guests. These weren't just desserts, they were edible art and a testament to one's wealth and culinary prowess. But honey had competition on the horizon, sugar. By the late Middle Ages, sugar began trickling into Europe, transforming confections and the economy alike. Imported from the Middle East, sugar was initially a rare and expensive commodity, more akin to a pharmaceutical than a pantry staple. It was often sold by apothecaries, touted for its supposed medicinal properties. This wasn't the sugar rush we're familiar with. It was more of a sugar miracle, reserved for the wealthy who could afford its steep price. To give you an idea of just how precious sugar was, consider this. In the 14th century, 1 pound of sugar could cost as much as a sheep. And while you can't exactly roast a pound of sugar for dinner, its value was undeniable. Sugar was used to create extravagant displays of wealth, from intricate sugar sculptures adorning banquet tables to sugar-laden pastries that were more about flaunting resources than satisfying cravings. The economics of sugar was a tangled web, driven by trade routes that spanned continents. The rise of sugar plantations in the Mediterranean and later in the Americas reshaped global economies and societies. But in medieval Europe, sugar was still a novelty. Its scarcity made it a luxury good, consumed sparingly by those who could afford it, often the same folks who were busy munching on manchets and sipping fine wines. The spice trade, too, played a critical role in the medieval sweet scene. Spices like cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg were the secret ingredients that elevated desserts to new heights. These spices were as exotic as they were expensive, sourced from far-off lands like India and the Spice Islands. The journey from spice market to medieval kitchen was long and fraught with danger, with merchants braving treacherous seas and unscrupulous traders. Yet, the allure of a spiced dessert was worth the risk, and for those who could afford it, a spiced confection was the ultimate indulgence. The intersection of sugar, spice, and wealth gave rise to a vibrant confectionery culture, but it wasn't without its myths. Romanticized visions of medieval feasting often overlook the harsh realities. While the nobility indulged in sugar-laden delights, the average peasant was more likely to sweeten their gruel with whatever wild berries they could forage. The chasm between the sweet experiences of the rich and the poor was as wide as the gap between a medieval castle and a peasant's hut. Yet, the myths persist. Perhaps it's the allure of imagining grand banquets where tables groaned under the weight of sugar-coated desserts, or the romantic notion of knights and ladies indulging in sweet courtship over honeyed treats. But the truth is, these sugar fantasies were reserved for a privileged few, while the rest of society looked on with envious eyes, or rather, envious taste buds. The economics of confectionery wasn't just about satisfying a sweet tooth, it was a reflection of social hierarchies and economic forces. Confections were a currency of power, a way to display wealth and influence in an age where appearances mattered as much as reality. They were the Instagram posts of their day, a curated glimpse into a life of luxury that few could ever hope to attain. As we unwrap the layers of this sugary history, let's not forget the bigger picture. The trade routes that brought sugar and spices to medieval Europe also paved the way for cultural exchanges, shaping societies in ways that extended far beyond the kitchen. The demand for these luxuries fueled exploration and exploitation, setting the stage for the global trade networks that would follow. So, as you enjoy your next sugary treat, take a moment to appreciate the history that sweetens it. Behind every spoonful of sugar lies a rich tapestry of trade, power, and human ingenuity. And as we continue our journey through medieval confections, remember, the story of sugar is as complex as its flavor, and we're just getting to the heart of it. Now that we've licked the sugar off our fingers, it's time to wash it down with whatever medieval folks were guzzling. And spoiler alert, it wasn't artisanal spring water. In fact, the idea of quenching one's thirst with a cool glass of water was about as popular back then as a rainstorm during a jousting match. Why, you ask? Well, medieval water sources were dodgier than a used cart salesman's promises. Picture rivers and wells doubling as open sewers, and you'll get the idea. With water quality so questionable, it's no surprise medieval societies turned to alcohol like a fish to, well, clean water. Into ale and wine, the heroes of the medieval hydration saga. Not only were they safer than the local H2O, but they also came with the delightful bonus of a buzz. Let's be clear though, medieval ale was not the craft IPA you might sip today. It was a low-alcohol, barely bitter brew, often consumed by the gallon. In fact, the average medieval person guzzled around a gallon of ale a day. Yup, you heard that right, a gallon. But before you start picturing medieval peasants perpetually stumbling around like extras in a Monty Python sketch, let's set the record straight. This ale was more like liquid bread than a modern brew, with an alcohol content hovering around 1 to 2%. It was a staple, a necessity, and a far cry from the mind-numbing concoctions of today. And then there was wine, the drink of choice for those with a bit more coin. While your average peasant might not have been swilling Bordeaux, wine was widely consumed across medieval Europe, especially in regions like France and Italy, where vineyards were as common as castles. Even in England, where the climate was about as welcoming to grapes as a dragon to a knight, wine was imported in staggering quantities. In 3080 alone, London imported nearly 100,000 casks of wine. That's about 12 million bottles, folks, enough to make any modern wine club envious. The preference for wine over water wasn't just about taste, it was about health, or at least the belief in health benefits. Wine was considered medicinal, a cure-all for everything from indigestion to melancholy, a medieval version of the wellness shot. And while today's doctors might raise an eyebrow at such claims, in an era without antibiotics, wine's antiseptic properties were a godsend. But let's not romanticize the medieval drinking scene too much. The myth of the constantly tipsy peasant is just that, a myth. Sure, alcohol was a daily part of life, but it was also a carefully managed resource. For one, brewing and winemaking were labor-intensive processes, with grain and grapes not just magically appearing in barrels. A bad harvest could spell disaster for alehouses and wine cellars alike, turning merry drinking sessions into sober realities. Speaking of alehouses, these were the medieval version of the modern pub, though perhaps with a tad more character. They were the social hubs of towns and villages, places where news was shared, deals were made, and occasionally punches were thrown. Alehouses were so integral to community life that they were often regulated by local authorities to prevent overcharging and ensure quality. Imagine a medieval Yelp, but with less typing and more shouting. Taverns, on the other hand, were a step up the social ladder. These establishments not only served drinks, but also offered food and lodging. They were the go-to pit stops for travellers and merchants, places where you could rest your weary feet, fill your belly, and maybe even encounter a bard spinning tales for free drinks. Taverns were more than just watering holes. They were centres of commerce and communication, vital for the exchange of goods and gossip alike. And then, of course, there were the inns, the top-tier establishments that catered to the nobility and wealthy merchants. Staying at an inn was like checking into a 5-star hotel, complete with the medieval equivalent of room service. These places offered fine wines, sumptuous meals, and a bed that didn't double as a flea circus. But all this luxury came at a price, one that only the elite could afford. The political power of these establishments was not to be underestimated. Taverns and inns often served as informal meeting places for guilds, councils, and even conspirators plotting against the crown. In a world where literacy was rare and the printing press was still a gleam in Gutenberg's eye, these venues were the medieval internet, hubs for the dissemination of ideas and information. Yet the social functions of drink extended beyond the walls of taverns and inns. Drinking was woven into the very fabric of medieval life, from festive celebrations like weddings and harvests to solemn occasions like funerals. Ale and wine were the unifying threads, binding communities together in times of joy and sorrow. They were the liquid embodiment of camaraderie, a shared experience in a world often marked by division. Of course, not all drinking was sociable or benign. Alcohol could be a double-edged sword, leading to brawls, accidents, and even crime. Drunkenness was a common problem, with medieval authorities frequently issuing edicts against excessive drinking. Yet, Even these attempts at regulation acknowledge the central role of alcohol in daily life, recognizing that the goal was moderation, not prohibition. As we raise a glass to the medieval drinking scene, it's worth noting the complex interplay of economics, culture, and necessity that shaped it. Alcohol was more than a drink. It was a solution to the era's water woes, a social lubricant, and a reflection of the society that produced it. So, next time you sip on a brew or swirl a glass of wine, remember the rich history that flows with every drop, a testament to human ingenuity and adaptability in the face of adversity. And with that, we'll leave our tankards on the table for now, ready to take another swig as we continue exploring the fascinating world of medieval life. Because while the drinks might have been different, the thirst for connection and community is a timeless tale. Cheers to that. And as we set our tankards down, let's pivot to a reflection on how the culinary cravings of medieval folks mirror our modern munching habits more closely than a medieval map might suggest. Spoiler alert, just like then, today's food choices are often less about need and more about status, ingenuity, and occasionally sheer absurdity. Take the medieval bread hierarchy, where the type of loaf you nibbled on was a social statement, akin to today's organic, gluten-free, activated, charcoal-infused sourdough. Back then, your bread choice broadcast your place in society like a medieval Instagram story. Flash forward a few centuries, and we're still using food to signal status, only now it's the difference between flaunting an avocado toast on artisanal brioche versus a humble PB&J on store-brand wheat. And let's not forget the meat pies, those savoury pastries that were essentially medieval fast food, with an ingredient list as mysterious as a politician's tax returns. Today's equivalent? That's right, the fast food burger, which might include more fillers and preservatives than actual beef. Just like the medieval pie, today's fast food offerings make economic sense, stretching ingredients to feed the masses while keeping costs low. Plus, there's a kind of culinary roulette in both eras as dining options. Will you get a gourmet treat or something more adventurous than anticipated? Speaking of adventurous, medieval confections were all about luxury and flaunting wealth, much like the high-end desserts you see on social media today. A medieval marchpane or sugar sculpture was the equivalent of today's gold leaf-topped cupcakes or diamond-dusted ice cream. These weren't just sweet treats, they were statements designed to impress and declare one's place in the social stratosphere. And while sugar's transition from a rare commodity to supermarket staple is a saga all its own, the notion of using food to display affluence is as timeless as a knight's quest for glory. Yet, despite the centuries, our fascination with medieval dining persists, often with a romanticized twist. Perhaps it's the allure of grand banquets, the clinking of goblets in candlelit halls, and the idea of a communal feast that draws us in. But the reality was often less glamorous and more gritty, with food scarcity, questionable hygiene, and social inequity lurking beneath the veneer of fine dining. However, just like the medieval myths, our modern narratives around food often gloss over these harsher realities, focusing instead on the spectacle. Now, let's address the elephant, or rather, the roast boar. At the feast, the socio-economic factors that intertwined food with status. In medieval times, food scarcity and the unpredictability of agriculture made certain foods precious and others pedestrian. The same dynamics are at play today, albeit in different forms. The rise of organic produce, the surge of farm-to-table dining, and the premium placed on exotic ingredients all echo medieval trends where access to certain foods marked one's social standing and cultural sophistication. Ingenious and absurd methods for satisfying cravings also have their modern parallels. Medieval cooks and housewives devised creative ways to stretch limited resources, much like today's home chefs who turn pantry staples into Instagram-worthy dishes. The drive to make the most of what's available is a thread that runs through history, whether it's turning questionable cuts of meat into pies or transforming leftover quinoa into a gourmet salad. But what about the myths that persist? The romantic visions of medieval feasts, with knights and ladies indulging in endless courses, are as enduring as they are inaccurate. They gloss over the realities of a time when most people faced meagre portions and the threat of famine. Yet, this mythologizing isn't unique to the past. Our modern food culture spins its own tales, with celebrity chefs and reality cooking shows creating narratives around dining that often overlook the everyday struggles of food production and consumption. The legacy of medieval dining is woven into the fabric of our own food culture, a testament to human ingenuity and adaptability. The socio-economic forces that shaped food choices then continue to influence them today, even if the ingredients and cooking methods have evolved. And while we may not be gnawing on manchets or nursing gallons of ale daily, the essence of using food as a marker of status, a source of creativity, and a subject of myth remains unchanged. So, next time you bite into a gourmet burger or savor a slice of artisanal bread, remember the history that flavors it. Behind every modern meal lies a rich tapestry of tradition, innovation, and human tenacity, a legacy of medieval dining that continues to inspire and inform. And as we bid farewell to this culinary journey, let's raise a metaphorical goblet to the enduring power of food, not just as sustenance, but as a lens through which we view society, culture, and our ever-evolving place within it. Cheers to the past, present, and future of dining. In a world that often felt like it was still trying to crawl out of its Stone Age slumber, the Indus Valley civilization was strutting its stuff with an architectural swagger that would make modern urban planners nod appreciatively. Around 2500 BCE, when most of humanity was still working out the logistics of a decent mud hut, the folks in the Indus Valley were busy building cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, complete with streets laid out in grids so precise they'd make your algebra teacher weep with joy. Let's drop into one of these urban masterpieces, Mohenjo-daro. This wasn't just a cluster of huts thrown together with some good intentions and a few sturdy sticks. No, this was a city planned with the kind of precision and foresight that suggests they had not just rulers but actual rulers, those straight-edge things you used to avoid in geometry class. The streets were laid out in a grid system that would feel right at home in downtown Manhattan. We're talking about wide, straight streets intersecting at right angles, making them not only easy to navigate, but also a dream for future archaeologists armed with measuring tapes and ambitions of academic glory. While the rest of the ancient world was still grappling with how to not wash away in a seasonal monsoon, these Indus Valley visionaries were already dodging natural disasters with something akin to architectural jiu-jitsu. The city planners of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa seemed to have cracked the code of urban resilience. Their secret weapon? A revolutionary drainage system that would make modern civil engineers want to time travel just to shake some hands. Each house came equipped with a private bathroom, and we're not talking about an outhouse that doubled as snake habitat. These were proper bathrooms with a sophisticated drainage network leading to covered sewers along the main streets. Picture this. While other civilizations were still figuring out the joys of a communal latrine, the Indus Valley folks had private toilets that flushed. That's right. They were living in a world where you didn't have to trek to the riverbanks every time nature called. It was like the ancient equivalent of having Wi-Fi in every room, unheard of, yet utterly transformative. The Indus Valley sanitation system wasn't just revolutionary, it was downright luxurious by ancient standards. The sewer systems were made of precisely laid bricks and sealed with gypsum mortar, indicating that these weren't hastily thrown together. We're talking about a level of craftsmanship that says, yes, we care about where the waste goes. And, if you think about it, that's a pretty modern mindset. They had a system of interconnected wells and reservoirs, ensuring that water supply was as reliable as the sunrise. But how, you ask, did they manage all this without the benefit of modern technology or, Google Maps? Well, the Indus Valley engineers were nothing if not resourceful. They harnessed the natural topography, using the slight gradient of the land to their advantage, allowing gravity to do the hard work of waste removal. It's the kind of elegant solution that makes you wonder if they weren't secretly time travelers with an eye for eco-friendly design. Of course, these feats of engineering genius didn't happen in a vacuum. The Indus Valley civilization was a hub of trade and commerce, with economic tentacles that stretched as far as Mesopotamia. This connectivity wasn't just about swapping goods. It was about exchanging ideas, technologies, and innovations. The economic prosperity fueled by trade allowed for investment in infrastructure, and the societal emphasis on cleanliness and order reflected a culture that prized public welfare. It was as much about practicality as it was about prestige. Yet, despite all this brilliance, the Indus Valley civilization eventually faded into obscurity, leaving behind these urban marbles like breadcrumbs for historians to puzzle over. As for the myth of the perfect civilization, it's worth noting that no amount of urban planning could shield them from the vagaries of climate change and shifting river patterns. The romantic narrative of a civilization that simply vanished is compelling, but the reality likely involves a cocktail of environmental upheaval and economic challenges. In the grand tapestry of human history, the Indus Valley civilization stands out as a testament to what can be achieved with a bit of ingenuity and a lot of bricks. Their legacy isn't just in the ruins of their cities, but in the enduring lesson that good planning and a decent drainage system can take you far, whether you're in 2500 BCE or the 21st century. In a world where today's urban planners often find themselves in a tug-of-war with potholes and leaky pipes, the Indus Valley civilization's engineers would probably look at our modern cities and say, "You had one job." Let's dive into the nuts and bolts, or should we say, the mud bricks of their sanitation genius, a marvel of antiquity that still has us scratching our heads in admiration and perhaps a tinge of envy. Start by considering the humble brick. Now, a brick may not seem like much to write home about unless your home happens to be built of them. But in the Indus Valley, these weren't just any bricks, they were standardized masterpieces. Each brick measured approximately 7x, 14x 28 centimeters, a ratio that screams mathematical precision and efficient stackability. This wasn't just about aesthetics or an ancient obsession with symmetry. Standardizing brick sizes meant construction was faster and more cost-effective, a lesson modern cities could probably learn as they trip over their own red tape. So why all the fuss about bricks? Well, these uniform blocks were the foundation, quite literally, of the Indus Valley's impressive architecture, particularly its water supply and drainage networks. Imagine a cityscape where every home had access to water through meticulously planned wells. Mohenjo-Daro alone boasted hundreds of wells, each lined with these standardized bricks, ensuring not just a reliable water supply, but one that was remarkably clean. This was no accident. It was the result of deliberate urban planning that prioritized public health and efficiency over ad hoc development. And then there was the drainage system, a network so sophisticated it would make any modern-day plumber weep tears of joy or envy. These weren't just open trenches that doubled as mosquito breeding grounds. No, the Indus engineers crafted covered drains that ran beneath the main streets, constructed with a gradient that cleverly harnessed gravity to keep things flowing smoothly. While other ancient civilizations were still figuring out the basics of waste disposal, the Indus Valley had already gone pro, with sewage systems that wouldn't look out of place in a textbook on sustainable urban design. But why all this emphasis on sanitation and urban planning? The answer lies in the economic and social fabric of the Indus Valley civilization. These cities were thriving centers of trade and commerce, their wealth fueled by exchange networks that stretched from the Arabian Sea to the Persian Gulf and beyond. This prosperity allowed for investment in infrastructure, but it also created a social expectation for cleanliness and order. Public sanitation wasn't just a matter of convenience, it was a statement of status and sophistication, a way of showcasing the civilization's ability to manage its resources wisely and effectively. Now, let's not get carried away with romanticizing this ancient utopia. The truth is, the Indus Valley civilization wasn't some perfect society where everyone lived in harmony with nature and each other. Like any society, it had its share of challenges and contradictions. The very systems that made it so advanced were also indicative of a society that was complex and, at times, precariously balanced. For instance, while these cities were marvels of urban planning, they were also vulnerable to environmental changes. The Indus River, a lifeline for the civilization, could be both a boon and a bane, with shifts in its course potentially spelling disaster for the settlements that relied on its waters. This leads us to one of the most tantalizing mysteries of the Indus Valley. Its eventual decline? Was it climate change, economic upheaval, or perhaps a combination of both that led to the civilization's downfall? The truth is likely a cocktail of factors, each playing its part in a slow unraveling of what was once one of the most sophisticated urban cultures of its time. It's a reminder that no matter how advanced a society becomes, it's never completely immune to the whims of nature and the inevitability of change. As we continue to dig into the layers of this ancient civilization, we're left with questions that resonate across the millennia. How did these people achieve such remarkable feats of engineering with the tools they had? What can their successes and failures teach us about the challenges we face today? In the end, the legacy of the Indus Valley is not just in the ruins of its cities, but in the enduring lesson that with a bit of ingenuity and a lot of standardized bricks, even the most daunting challenges can be met head-on. So next time you're stuck in traffic, cursing the roadwork that never seems to end, spare a thought for the Indus engineers. They might just have a few lessons left to teach us. As we leave behind the Indus Valley's architectural wizardry, let's shimmy over to one of its most iconic structures. Cue the spotlight on the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro. Now, if you're imagining a luxurious infinity pool with an ancient twist, slow your roll. This isn't a place where ancient influences lounged around sipping ambrosia, though it might have been just as significant in its own way. The Great Bath, measuring roughly 12 by 7 metres and about 2.4 metres deep, was constructed with precise brickwork and a waterproofing technique that would make your local pool contractor do a double take. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a luxury spa, but with less eucalyptus oil and more existential contemplation. Situated in the city's citadel, this massive tank was meticulously sealed with bitumen, ensuring that any dreams of a water leak were promptly dashed. So, was this really a pool or something more? Let's dive into the nitty-gritty. The Great Bath was likely used for ritualistic purposes rather than your everyday backstroke practice. The idea of ritual baths isn't new. Remember, these were the days when spirituality and cleanliness were as intertwined as your earbuds after a jog. The bath's location, smack dab in the citadel, suggests it was more about social and religious rituals than recreational swimming. It's not hard to imagine the citizens of Mohenjo-Daro gathering around, witnessing purification ceremonies that involved some serious aquatic action. But was it all about purity, or was there a social scene bubbling beneath the surface? Picture this. The movers and shakers of the Indus Valley, clad in their finest linens, mingling around the bath, exchanging the latest gossip, and maybe even trading a few goods. It was the kind of place where you might seal a business deal or hear the latest on that mysterious neighbour who had a penchant for collecting exotic beads. Mythbusters assemble. While romantic tales might paint the Great Bath as the world's first swimming pool, let's not kid ourselves. The bath's design, with steps leading down into the water, says more holy immersion than cannonball competition. And yet, the allure of these myths persists, perhaps because they add a splash of glamour to our understanding of ancient lives. Who doesn't love the idea of ancient pool parties, even if the reality was more solemn? In terms of hygiene, the Great Bath reveals the Indus Valley's near-obsessive commitment to cleanliness. It was a reflection of a broader societal norm where ritual baths weren't just a matter of personal hygiene, but a communal responsibility. The emphasis on cleanliness permeated every aspect of their lives, from the meticulous drainage systems to well-planned public waterworks. The Indus Valley folks seemed to understand that a clean city was a healthy city long before the phrase public health entered humanity's lexicon. But let's talk about the real MVPs of this story, the people who made it all happen. Behind the Great Bath's grandeur were countless labourers, artisans and planners. Their work speaks volumes about a society that valued skilled craftsmanship and collective effort. The economic prosperity of the Indus Valley, buoyed by extensive trade networks, allowed for such monumental projects. Without the wealth generated from trade with regions as far-flung as Mesopotamia, such ambitious undertakings might have remained pipe dreams, pun intended. Yet, amid the marvels of engineering and hygiene, it's crucial to remember the stark realities of ancient life. While we might romanticize the Great Bath as a symbol of a sophisticated society, daily life for most citizens was likely a far cry from this ritualistic splendor. The majority of people were probably too busy with the rigors of subsistence, farming, crafting, trading, to partake in the ceremonies at the Great Bath. It's the eternal dichotomy of history, the grandeur of public spaces versus the grind of private lives. As we ponder whether the Great Bath was more about spiritual cleansing or social networking, we're left with a bigger question. What does this say about us today? The desire for cleanliness, community, and ritual hasn't changed much over the millennia. Sure, we might swan around with spa memberships and social media, but at our core, we're still seeking the same connections, both spiritual and social, that brought the people of Mohenjo-Daro together. So, As we float along the currents of history, the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro remains a testament to a civilization that valued order, cleanliness, and perhaps a touch of the divine. It's a reminder that even in the ancient world, humans weren't just surviving, they were thriving, innovating, and finding ways to make life a little more bearable and maybe even enjoyable. As we continue to peel back the layers of the Indus Valley, one thing's for sure: these ancient innovators had a knack for making waves, both literally and figuratively. As the last ripples of the Great Bath's historical splash settle, let's shimmy our focus to the intricate social and political tapestry that made such marvels possible in the Indus Valley civilization. Now, you might be wondering, who was pulling the strings behind this urban symphony? Well, brace yourself for a fascinating twist. We don't exactly know. Cue the mysterious music. The governance structures of the Indus Valley civilization are as elusive as a cat in a laser pointer factory. Archaeologists haven't unearthed any palatial complexes or statuesque rulers to fawn over, which suggests that the civilization might have been run by a more decentralized form of administration. Imagine a society so ahead of its time that it skipped the whole worship the guy with the biggest hat phase. Instead, it seems they could have operated on a communal or even corporate-like model, where various groups or guilds managed different aspects of urban life. It's like the world's earliest example of decentralized organization. Take that, blockchain enthusiasts. Speaking of enigmas, the Indus script is another tantalizing puzzle piece. Despite the best efforts of linguists and code breakers, this script remains undeciphered, leaving us with a collection of tantalizing symbols that look like they could be ancient emojis. With over 400 distinct signs, these inscriptions have been found on seals, pottery, and tools, suggesting they were used for both administrative and ritual purposes. But until someone cracks this linguistic enigma, we're left with more questions than answers. Was it a language of kings and traders, or a sacred script read only by the initiated? It's the historical equivalent of a locked diary, its secrets just out of reach, whispering stories of a bygone era. Now, let's dive into the lifeblood of any civilization, trade, and economics. The Indus Valley civilization wasn't just a local sensation, it was the ancient world's version of a global influencer. With trade routes stretching as far as Mesopotamia and the Arabian Peninsula, the Indus people were swapping goods like copper, textiles, and beads faster than you can say Silk Road. This vast network wasn't just about acquiring exotic goods. It was a two-way street of cultural and technological exchange. Imagine the excitement of an Indus trader, bringing home a Mesopotamian artifact, exchanging stories of distant lands over a fireside chat. But let's nip the utopian myth in the bud. While the Indus Valley's trade prowess paints a picture of prosperity, it doesn't mean everyone was living in an equal slice of paradise. Economic disparities likely existed, with wealth concentrated among merchants and artisans who had their fingers in the trade pie. And despite the impressive urban planning, life wasn't all grid streets and flush toilets for everyone. The majority probably toiled in fields or workshops, contributing to the city's wealth while navigating the complexities of urban life. It's a reminder that even in a civilization as advanced as the Indus, the gap between haves and have-nots was as real as ever. As we peel back these layers, one thing is clear: the Indus Valley wasn't a monolithic utopia. It was a dynamic society juggling the challenges of rapid urbanization and environmental shifts. The environmental changes that eventually led to their decline were no small hiccup. Shifts in the river patterns could transform a bustling city into a ghost town, highlighting the precarious balance these cities maintained with their natural surroundings. It's the ancient equivalent of playing Jenga in the middle of an earthquake. One wrong move, and the whole structure could come tumbling down. Yet, amid these challenges, the Indus Valley civilization thrived for centuries, leaving behind a legacy of innovation and ingenuity. They showed us that, with a bit of strategic foresight and a lot of trade, a civilization could build wonders that would baffle future generations. But they also remind us that no matter how advanced a society becomes, it's never immune to the whims of nature or the march of time. As we continue to explore this ancient enigma, we're left with a tantalizing mix of knowledge and mystery. The Indus Valley civilization may have vanished, but its echoes still reverberate through history, challenging us to decipher the lessons they left behind. From their elusive script to their sophisticated urban planning, the Indus people beckon us to dig deeper, to uncover the stories hidden beneath layers of time and dust. So, as we hold this ancient civilization under our modern microscope, let's take a moment to appreciate the brilliance and complexity of the Indus Valley. It was a civilization that dared to dream big, to build bigger, and to leave a legacy that continues to intrigue and inspire. And as we await the next clue that might unlock their secrets, let's keep the spirit of curiosity alive, always ready to peel back another layer of history in our quest for understanding. And so we find ourselves at the end of our journey through the Indus Valley civilization, still scratching our heads over the enigmatic brilliance of a society that managed to pull off urban planning feats that wouldn't look out of place in a modern city, and then seemingly ghosted the pages of history. It's a bit like if Da Vinci had painted the Mona Lisa and then promptly tossed his paintbrush into the Arno, leaving us to marvel and wonder. But as we wrap things up, it's time to tie the threads of this ancient tapestry together and ponder what the folks of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro left behind, not just in bricks and mortar, but in ideas and legacies. Now, let's tackle the grand finales of their civilization, the moment around 1900 BCE when things started going south faster than a snowbird in January. Theories abound, but the stock villain in this historical whodunit is climate change. Yep, Mother Nature might have pulled the ultimate power move, with shifting river patterns and drying climates, turning fertile lands into fields of despair. While the Indus River was once the lifeline of prosperity, changes in its course could have transformed thriving cities into ghost towns. It's a sobering reminder that nature can be a fickle partner, capable of doling out prosperity or packing a punch that even the most meticulous urban planning can't withstand. Of course, we can't ignore the possibility of invasions by mysterious outsiders. Cue the dramatic music and shadowy figures lurking at the borders. However, the evidence for this is as ethereal as a wisp of smoke on a windy day. While later arrivals like the Aryans did shake things up, the idea that they single-handedly toppled a civilization as advanced as the Indus is a bit of a stretch. More likely, it was a confluence of factors, a cocktail of climate woes, economic shifts, and possibly some social strife that led to the decline. History loves a good mystery, and the Indus Valley offers us one wrapped in layers of intrigue and unanswered questions. But let's not dwell too long on the civilization's swan song. Instead, let's consider what the Indus Valley's urban planning and sanitation systems can teach us today. These ancient architects understood something fundamental, that the backbone of a successful city lies in its infrastructure. Their grid-like cities, complete with private bathrooms and sophisticated drains, were light years ahead in terms of hygiene and convenience. In an era when many were still grappling with basic sanitation, the Indus folks were living in a world where cleanliness wasn't next to godliness. It was a civic duty. For modern urban planners, there's a wealth of knowledge to mine from these ancient blueprints. Imagine a world where city planning wasn't an afterthought, but a well-oiled machine, where public welfare was built right into the streets and sewers. Today's urban centres, often plagued by congestion and sanitation woes, could take a page or two from the Indus playbook. After all, in a world where too many cities are in a constant battle against potholes and leaks, the Indus Valley's engineers would probably wag a finger and say, "You had one job." And what about the social and economic lessons? The Indus Valley's emphasis on trade as a means to prosperity is a timeless reminder of the power of connectivity. In a world that seems to be increasingly insular, it's worth noting that these ancient people thrived not by drawing borders, but by reaching out across them. Their networks of trade and cultural exchange with far-off lands like Mesopotamia and the Arabian Peninsula speak to a cosmopolitan mindset that was ahead of its time. It's the ancient version of globalization, minus the carbon footprint. Of course, it's not all rose-tinted glasses and romanticized history. The Indus Valley, like any society, had its fair share of challenges and contradictions. Economic disparities likely existed, with wealth and privilege concentrated among certain classes. The myth of the perfect civilization is just that, a myth. But even in its imperfections, the Indus Valley offers us lessons on resilience and adaptability. They were a society that understood the importance of living in harmony with their environment, yet they also faced the harsh reality that nature can be an unpredictable master. As we step back from the ruins of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, We're left with a civilization that, despite its mysterious decline, achieved feats of urban planning that continue to inspire and baffle us. Their legacy isn't just in the bricks they've left behind, but in the enduring lessons on sustainability, trade, and communal responsibility. And as we grapple with our own modern challenges, from climate change to urban sprawl, perhaps there's wisdom to be found in the echoes of the Indus Valley. So, dear listeners, as you drift off to sleep tonight, ponder the streets of Mohenjo-Daro, the whispers of history carried on the winds of time. Imagine a world where every flush, every trade route, and every brick was a testament to human ingenuity and cooperation. The Indus Valley civilization may have vanished, but its spirit lingers. A reminder that great civilizations are not just built on stones, but on shared dreams and collective efforts. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth remembering. You wake up in a house made of turf, which is basically like living inside a grassy burrito cozy but a bit damp. The morning sun creeps over the horizon, casting a golden light on the rugged landscape of 10th century Iceland. You can almost hear the volcanic soil sizzling under that glare, whispering tales of an island that's as fierce as it is beautiful. You stretch, shake off the cold, and get ready to dive into the world of Norse trading networks. Now, let's talk about Iceland's geography. It's not just a random chunk of rock in the North Atlantic, it's a strategic launchpad in the Viking Age. Thanks to its volcanic soil, which is oddly fertile in places, Iceland is a tiny breadbasket, albeit one that's more about barley than baguettes. This soil is a blessing and a curse. It's great for growing certain crops, but good luck with anything that requires a gentle touch. The land is rugged, and so are the people. Farming here is less about leisurely strolls through fields, and more about braving the elements with a grim determination that would make a Game of Thrones character say, "That's hardcore." You head out to the harbour where the action begins. Picture a bustling scene with boats bobbing like corks on the water, loaded with goods that are about to make their way across the North Atlantic. The economy here is a bit like a Norse epic, full of twists, turns, and the occasional surprise walrus. Yes, walrus tusks are a big deal, believe it or not. These shiny ivory treasures are like the Bitcoin of their day, traded for everything from silver to spices. And let's not forget the fish. Cod and herring are practically currency. Without these, the Viking diet would look a lot less impressive and a lot more like a sad, fishless saga. Iceland isn't exactly a paradise for traders, but it's got something valuable: proximity. It's well positioned between the rich markets of Europe and the resource-rich lands of the north. Think of it as the midway point between the world's best shopping mall and its most chaotic bazaar. The Norse traders are like the original long-distance truckers, minus the trucks and with a lot more rowing. They navigate these treacherous waters with ships like the Nar, a cargo vessel that's the Viking equivalent of a reliable minivan. It's not glamorous, but it gets the job done. Trade routes here are the veins of the economy, pulsing with life and goods. Iceland might be isolated, but it's not cut off. The chieftains, the movers and shakers of this society, maintain connections that stretch out like a spider's web across the sea. They swap stories, goods, and occasionally a bit of gossip. These routes connect Iceland to places like Norway, Sweden, and even the British Isles. It's a network that makes sure even the remotest corner of Iceland gets its share of imported luxuries, like those fancy textiles from the East, which are basically medieval designer labels. You wander through the market, where traders haggle with a ferocity that would make a used car salesman blush. Barter is the name of the game. There's no currency as we know it, just a lot of back and forth about the value of a good fish versus a shiny tusk. It's a world where your word is your bond, and a good reputation is worth more than gold. Mess up a deal, and you might find yourself on the wrong end of a saga one where you're not exactly the hero. The importance of these trade routes can't be overstated. They're the arteries through which the economic lifeblood flows, fueling not just the economy but also social and political structures. The chieftains use trade to solidify their power, rewarding loyal followers with goods and making alliances with far-off rulers. It's a delicate balance, one that's as much about politics as it is about profit. As you take in the scene, you can't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of it all. Here are people who dared to carve out a life in one of the most inhospitable places on earth, and then decided that wasn't enough, so they took to the seas to trade with the rest of the world. It's a testament to human ingenuity and resilience, a reminder that even in the most unlikely places, people will find a way to make things work. The sun climbs higher, casting long shadows across the harbour as the day unfolds. You feel a part of this ancient network, a link in a chain that stretches back through time, connecting you to the traders, farmers, and chieftains who shaped this world. It's a world of harsh realities and incredible opportunities, where every day is a new adventure on the edge of the known world. And as you stand there, you can't help but feel the pull of the sea, calling you to explore the unknown, just as it did for those Norse traders all those centuries ago. As you stand there, the sea breeze brushing against your face like a cold Norse kiss, you can't help but feel the magnetic pull of adventure, urging you to step aboard one of those legendary longships. The Viking longship. Now there's a piece of work that could make even the most die-hard landlubber consider a career change. These ships are engineering marvels of the 10th century, sleek and sturdy, built to slice through the water like a hot knife through butter. They're the ultimate expression of Norse ingenuity, and they're the reason those traders could reach far-flung places like Constantinople, or Miklagard as they called it. Longships, particularly the Nar, are your bread and butter if you're a trader. They're not just floating vessels, they're your floating marketplace. Picture this, a 50-foot-long wooden beauty with a broad hull that can carry up to 24 tons of cargo. It's not just what's on board, it's the board itself. This ship is your ticket to prosperity or ruin depending on the seas and your bargaining skills. Building one of these babies isn't cheap either. You'd need around 30,000 iron nails, and trust me, that's a lot of hammering. And let's not forget the wood. A mix of oak and pine, perfect for weathering the North Atlantic swells. Now, you might be wondering, what does it cost to launch such an expedition? Well, it's not just about the ship. You need a crew, provisions, and enough trade goods to make the trip worthwhile. All in, you're looking at a small fortune by medieval standards. Hiring a crew of about 20 men would set you back a fair amount, considering you have to pay them not just in silver, but in promises of a fair share of the spoils. Then there's the cost of provisions, which might include barrels of smoked fish, ale, and enough dried meat to make a modern-day prepper envious. Setting sail isn't just about loading up and pushing off either. It's a high-stakes game of meteorological chess. The wrong weather means you're playing dice with the gods, or worse, with the sea herself, who can be as unpredictable as she is unforgiving. You've got to be a bit of a meteorologist yourself, reading the sky and the sea for signs of a safe journey. It's a gamble worth taking, though, because the rewards could be as grand as the risks. Let's talk about those rewards. You're not just carrying random baubles, you're dealing in the medieval equivalents of high fashion and high tech. Textiles are a big hit, especially those from the east. Silks from Byzantium can make a chieftain's wife the envy of the fjord. Metals are another hot commodity, with iron and silver being the most sought after. If you're lucky, you might bring back some of that silver from the markets of Dublin or the fairs in Hedeby. And then there are the luxury items, amber and walrus ivory, the bling of the Viking age, highly prized by everyone from local chieftains to foreign kings. Bartering these items isn't as straightforward as you might think. This isn't a simple matter of, I'll trade you 3 goats for 2 cows. It's more like a medieval stock exchange with fluctuating values and a lot of back and forth. The exchange rate for a length of fine silk might be an armful of furs, while a chunk of amber could fetch enough grain to feed a village for a month. It's a world where the art of the deal is just as important as the goods themselves. Your reputation as a fair and shrewd trader can mean the difference between a successful expedition and a humiliating return home with a nearly empty hold. The sea journey itself is a test of endurance and skill. You're not just sailing down to the corner store, you're navigating potentially thousands of miles of open ocean with only the stars and your wits to guide you. The Norse sailors were masters of this, using landmarks and the sun's position to keep their bearings. Still, it wasn't uncommon for storms to blow ships off course, leading them to discover new lands or meet an untimely end on some rocky shore. The sagas are full of tales of lost ships and the brave souls who set sail, never to return. And then there's the reality of life on board. It's not all heroic sagas and stirring sea shanties. You're cramped into a space with your fellow crew members, and privacy is as rare as a unicorn. The days are long, the nights are cold, and the food is monotonous at best. Think endless days of hardtack and salted fish, with the occasional ale ration to lift your spirits. It's a far cry from the romantic image of the Viking warrior, but it's the price you pay for the chance to return home with your ship's hull groaning under the weight of treasure. Despite the hardships, there's a certain camaraderie that develops among the crew. You're all in it together, sharing the same risks and rewards. It's a bond forged in salt water and sea spray, and it's what makes these voyages not just a job, but a way of life. The sea calls to you, promising fortune and adventure, and you answer with a heart full of hope and a belly full of butterflies. It's a dance as old as time itself, and one that continues to hold a certain magic even in our modern world. As you prepare for the expedition, each detail matters. Your ship is ready, your crew assembled, and your cargo packed. You stand on the brink of adventure, ready to push off into the unknown with nothing but your skill and daring to carry you through. It's a moment that's both exhilarating and terrifying, a testament to the courage and tenacity of those Norse traders who dared to dream beyond the horizon. As the oars dip into the icy North Atlantic, you can almost hear the creak of ambition mingling with the groan of wood against water. You're not just pushing off into the blue yonder, you're about to crash headfirst into the political maelstrom that is 10th century Europe. And let me tell you, it's every bit as chaotic as it sounds. Let's start with the Norse clans, those merry bands of marauding relatives who could make a family dinner feel like a diplomatic summit. Each clan is like its own mini-kingdom, with chieftains who are part warlord, part CEO. They're the ones pulling the strings, deciding which alliances to forge and which to dissolve faster than you can say mutiny. These chieftains are savvy, playing political chess with their neighbours, and sometimes even their own kin. It's a high-stakes game where one wrong move could see you losing more than just your seat at the table. Now, throw into the mix the European kingdoms, each with its own set of ambitions and grievances. You've got the likes of England, Francia, and the Holy Roman Empire, each with their eyes on the prize, be it land, riches, or just a good old-fashioned power trip. These kingdoms aren't just sitting around waiting to be discovered, they're actively shaping the economic and political landscape, often with a sharp sword and an even sharper tongue. Trade here isn't a matter of mere transactions. It's a delicate dance of diplomacy and sometimes deception. Suppose you want to trade with England. Well, you'd better be on good terms with the local earl, or risk having your goods confiscated faster than a Viking raid. And let's not forget those tariffs. Yes, even back then, they were a thorn in the side of traders. You'd face tolls and taxes at ports, and woe betide anyone who tried to dodge them. It's like the world's first version of a customs office, only with more chainmail and fewer forms. Speaking of alliances, they're the bread and butter of safe passage. You don't just saunter into a foreign port and start unloading your wares, you need guarantees. These could be in the form of formal treaties or more informal agreements, sealed with a hearty handshake or sometimes a marriage alliance. It's all about who you know and who owes you a favour. A well-placed gift to the right chieftain or king could mean the difference between a profitable voyage and one that ends with you cooling your heels in a dank dungeon. And let's talk about the legal systems, or the lack thereof. In many places, law is less about justice and more about who can shout the loudest. The Norse have their own system, the Thing, an assembly where disputes are settled and laws are laid down. It's a bit like a medieval town hall meeting, but with more beards and the occasional axe-wielding argument. European kingdoms, on the other hand, might have more formal systems, but they're just as prone to bending the rules if it suits their needs. And don't even get me started on the Byzantine court. Those guys could make Machiavelli look like a novice. The power dynamics here are a tangled web of loyalties and betrayals. You've got Norse clans that might be allies one day and enemies the next, depending on who insulted whose honour. In Europe, kings and lords jostle for power like it's a game of musical thrones, with alliances shifting faster than the tide. It's a world where your best friend today might be plotting your downfall tomorrow, and that's if you're lucky. But here's the kicker. Despite all this chaos, or maybe because of it, trade flourishes. The movement of goods across these territories is like a lifeline, connecting disparate regions and cultures in a way that nothing else could. You've got Norwegian furs making their way to the markets of Constantinople and Arabic spices finding their way to the tables of Scandinavia. It's a global economy in its infancy, driven by the sheer will and tenacity of those willing to brave the uncertain seas. So, while the romantic image of the lone trader striking out into the unknown has its appeal, the reality is a lot more complex and a lot more interesting. You're not just a trader, you're a diplomat, a strategist, and sometimes a bit of a gambler. You weigh the risks and rewards, navigate through political minefields, and keep one eye on the horizon and the other on your back. It's a world where fortunes are made and lost on the turn of the tide, and where every voyage is a new chapter in an epic saga of ambition, adventure, and survival. As the wind fills your sails, carrying you towards your next destination, you can't help but feel a thrill of anticipation. After all, who knows what the next market holds? New alliances, fresh rivalries, and the chance to carve your name into the annals of history, or at least into the side of a particularly nice piece of driftwood. And that, my friend, is the real adventure of 10th century Norse trading. And here you are, gliding into a bustling European trading hub, the air thick with the chatter of merchants and the smell of goods from every corner of the known world. This isn't just any port, it's a teeming microcosm of medieval capitalism, with Norse traders like you at its heart. Forget the blood and thunder image of Vikings as relentless marauders. Today, you're more interested in the art of the deal than the swing of an axe. Now, let's set the stage. We're talking about places like Hedeby in modern-day Germany or Birka in Sweden, both serious contenders for the title of medieval times business district. These hubs are where the Norse would rub shoulders with everyone from Slavic merchants to Arab traders, each pushing their own brand of exotic goods. Hedeby, for instance, was a veritable melting pot, with its strategic location at the base of the Jutland Peninsula, making it a prime pit stop for traders journeying between the North Sea and the Baltic. As you step into this cauldron of commerce, the first thing you notice is the staggering variety of wares on display. We're talking Byzantine silks, Frankish swords, Arabian spices, and, of course, those coveted walrus tusks from Greenland. Each item tells a story of a journey, of lands far beyond the horizon, and it's your job to weave these tales into gold, or at least a decent profit. But let's not romanticize too much. This isn't exactly the medieval version of a high-end shopping mall. The market's more like a battlefield of wits and wallets, with traders haggling over prices like their lives depend on it, and in a way, they do. It's here that you really see the Norse talent for negotiation. These folks didn't just raid for loot, they knew how to make a coin or two stretch as far as their longships could sail. So, what's the deal with these Vikings as traders? Well, they're not exactly the plunder-happy brutes of popular lore. Sure, they had their moments of pillage, but these were people who understood that a fat purse often beats a fierce sword. Archaeological digs at places like Ribe and Kaupang reveal goods from as far as the Middle East, pointing to a trade network that would make even today's global supply chains look quaint. Let's take a moment to debunk the myth of the Viking as a one-note looter. Yes, they were capable warriors, but they were also shrewd businessmen. They understood that while raiding might get you some quick cash, trading could build empires. The Norse weren't just pillaging, they were prospecting. And they did it with a flair for diplomacy that would rival any modern-day politician. But wait, there's more. You're not just bartering goods here, you're trading in culture itself. Each exchange is a meeting of minds as much as markets. When Norse traders met their Arab counterparts, they weren't just swapping silver for spices, they were sharing knowledge, tales, and perhaps even a few tall tales about the lands beyond the sea. It's a medieval version of cross-cultural exchange, one that historians are only now beginning to fully appreciate. The Norse also had a knack for integrating into local societies, sometimes settling and blending in rather than standing out. Take the Norse settlers in Normandy, for example. They didn't just raid and leave, they became part of the local landscape, eventually leading to the creation of a duchy that would change European history. So next time someone calls a Viking a simple savage, remind them that these were people who could switch from warrior to trader to settler faster than you can say saga. But let's not sugarcoat things too much. The trading hubs weren't all sunshine and silks. They were also places of intrigue and danger. Rival traders could be as cutthroat as any Viking raid, and alliances could shift with the wind. Your reputation as a trader was everything. It was your calling card, your credit rating, and your insurance policy all rolled into one. Lose it, and you might as well be sailing back to Iceland with a hold full of unsold goods. And let's talk about the logistics. Moving goods across Europe wasn't just a matter of loading up and setting sail. You had to navigate not just the seas, but the tangled web of political alliances and territorial disputes. The Danegeld, for instance, was a tax paid by some European kingdoms to prevent Viking attacks. But more than just a tribute, it was a recognition of the economic impact these Norse traders had. You weren't just trading goods, you were trading influence. As you wind your way through the market, the scope of Norse trade becomes clear. This isn't just about making a quick buck. It's about creating networks that span continents. It's about a people who, despite their fearsome reputation, were savvy enough to see the value of peace over plunder, of trade over tyranny. And that's the real story here. The Vikings as connectors, not just conquerors. They were the glue that held together a patchwork of cultures, languages, and peoples. Their longships didn't just carry weapons, they carried the seeds of a global economy, one that would lay the groundwork for the world we know today. As you wrap up your day at the market, with the sun dipping low and the scent of spices lingering in the air, take a moment to reflect. The Norse weren't just warriors, they were the world's original entrepreneurs, daring to dream of a world beyond the horizon, one trade deal at a time. And while the romantic image of the Viking warrior sailing into battle has its appeal, it's the reality of the Viking trader that truly shaped history. So, as you pack up your goods and prepare for the journey back to Iceland, remember this. It's not just the sword that tells the story of the Norse. It's the pen, the ship, and the ledger. It's the tales they told and the trades they made. And as you sail into the sunset, the horizon stretching out before you, know that you're part of a legacy that's as much about building bridges as it is about breaching defences. That's the real saga of the Norse traders, adventurers who turned the tides of history with every oar stroke. As you sail into the sunset, the horizon stretching out before you, you carry more than just goods on your ship. You're part of a legacy that's as much about building bridges as it is about breaching defences. The Norse traders, those daring entrepreneurs of the Viking Age, have left an indelible mark on history, one that isn't just etched in the annals of conquests but also in the chronicles of commerce. Let's take a moment to reflect on the profound impact these Norse traders had on Iceland and Europe. Iceland, perched on the edge of the known world, became a bustling hub of activity thanks to the intrepid spirit of its traders. The island may have been remote, but it was never isolated. The trade networks established by these Norse adventurers linked Iceland to the wider world, bringing in not just goods but also ideas and innovations. It was like the medieval version of a Wi-Fi hotspot, connecting people, places and cultures in ways that would shape the future. Consider the technological developments that sprang from these interactions. The Norse were not just masters of the sea, they were also pioneers in shipbuilding and navigation. The iconic longship, with its sleek design and shallow draft, was a marvel of engineering that allowed the Vikings to explore vast stretches of the globe. These vessels were the spacecraft of their time, enabling traders to venture into the unknown with a confidence that bordered on audacity. The knowledge of ship construction and navigation spread along the trade routes, influencing maritime practices across Europe. It was a case of innovation through osmosis, with each encounter leaving a trace that would ripple through history. Culturally, the Norse traders were agents of change, blending their traditions with those of the lands they visited. They were cultural chameleons, adapting to new environments while leaving their own imprint on the societies they touched. This cultural exchange was a two-way street, with the Norse adopting elements from the peoples they traded with, from fashion to language. It was a dynamic process of give and take, a medieval melting pot that enriched both sides. Now, let's talk about the legacy of these traders in shaping modern perceptions of the Viking Age. The image of the Viking as a ruthless raider is a compelling one, filled with drama and danger. But it's only part of the story. The Norse traders were the unsung heroes of their era, the ones who turned the gears of commerce and created connections that transcended borders. They weren't just swinging axes, they were making deals and forging alliances. It's a narrative that's often overshadowed by the more sensational tales of raids and conquests, but it's no less important. In many ways, the Norse traders were the original global citizens, navigating a world that was far more interconnected than we might imagine. They were the architects of a network that spanned continents, a feat that required not just courage, but also intelligence and adaptability. Their story is a reminder that history is not just a series of battles and borders, but also a tapestry of trade and transformation. As we ponder the blend of myth and reality in historical storytelling, it's clear that the allure of the Viking saga lies in its duality. The romantic image of the fierce warrior is captivating, but the reality of the savvy trader is equally compelling. It's a juxtaposition that speaks to the complexity of human nature, the ability to be both conqueror and collaborator, raider and merchant, warrior and diplomat. In the end, the legacy of the Norse traders is one of resilience and resourcefulness. They were people who dared to dream beyond their shores, who saw the world not just as a series of obstacles, but as a canvas of opportunities. They remind us that the true power of the Viking Age lay not just in its might, but in its mind, in the ability to navigate both the seas and the intricacies of human interaction. As you stand on the deck of your ship, the wind at your back and the horizon before you, take a moment to appreciate the journey. Not just the one you're on, but the one that countless traders before you embarked upon. It's a journey that continues to echo through time, a testament to the enduring spirit of adventure and enterprise that defined the Norse traders. And as you sail into the future, know that you're part of a legacy that's as vast and varied as the ocean itself. A legacy that continues to inspire and intrigue, one trade at a time. In a world where gods were as real as your next-door neighbour's barking dog, the ancient Greeks had a peculiar obsession: oracles. Yes, those mysterious figures who were said to have a direct line to divine wisdom, like an ancient version of Siri, but with a lot more incense and less reliable Wi-Fi. The Greeks weren't just curious, they were downright fanatical about these prophetic pronouncements. They'd pack up, travel miles, and sometimes spend a small fortune just to hear some cryptic message that might, or might not, reveal their future. Let's start with the big players in this mystic game, Delphi and Dodona. Delphi, nestled on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, wasn't just the most famous oracle site, it was the Beyoncé of prophetic venues. We're talking a staggering number of visitors every year, easily rivaling the size of a modern music festival. Think Woodstock, but with more togas and fewer guitar riffs. In its heyday, Delphi drew in thousands. Some estimates say up to 30,000 pilgrims annually, all eager to catch a whiff of divine insight. And the allure of Delphi wasn't just in numbers. The Pythia, the high priestess of Apollo, delivered her prophecies in a cryptic style that would make even the most seasoned crossword puzzler sweat. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill fortune cookie. These messages were layered, ambiguous, and left plenty of room for interpretation. It was the ultimate divine Rorschach test. Need proof? Consider the famous case of Croesus, king of Lydia, who was told that if he attacked Persia, he would destroy a great empire. Spoiler, it was his own. Talk about a plot twist. Over at Dodona, things were a bit more down-to-earth literally. Located in a grove of sacred oaks, Dodona's oracle was one of the oldest, even if it played second fiddle to Delphi's grandeur. Here, the priests and priestesses interpreted the rustling of leaves, the cooing of doves, and other natural phenomena to deliver their pronouncements. It was like reading tea leaves, but on steroids. And while it might sound quaint, Dodona was no less influential. For centuries, it was the go-to spot for those seeking divine guidance, especially before embarking on any major life decision, like whether to invade a neighboring city-state or just stay home and watch the ancient Greek equivalent of Netflix. Now, before you dismiss these ancient Yelp reviews of the gods, consider this. Oracles weren't just giving out life advice like a mystical agony aunt. Their answers shaped political, military, and personal decisions with serious consequences. City-states would consult oracles before going to war, politicians would check in before making policy changes, and individuals would seek guidance on personal matters. Oracles were less about predicting the future and more about framing the present, like a cosmic press secretary spinning the god's latest press release. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. While the image of a priestess swaying in a trance and spouting wisdom is undeniably captivating, the reality was a bit messier. For starters, the cost of consulting an oracle wasn't trivial. The process often involved sacrifices, offerings, and fees that could add up to a king's ransom. And while consulting the oracle was a holy experience, it was also a business, one that required organization, administration, and a steady supply of willing supplicants. In the grand scheme, oracles were a fascinating blend of religion, politics, and economics. They were part of the societal fabric, yes, but they were also a means of control, a way for the elite to maintain power by claiming divine endorsement. And while the allure of the mystical is undeniable, it's worth remembering that behind every whisper of divine guidance was a human hand, interpreting, translating, and possibly manipulating the cryptic messages from the gods. So, as we close this first chapter of our journey into the world of ancient Greek oracles, ask yourself, what would you have done for a glimpse of your future? And more importantly, would you have trusted a message that could mean everything or nothing at all? Let's dive into the ancient Greek equivalent of a sky-high restaurant bill, consulting an oracle. Imagine the scene. You're a well-to-do ancient Greek eager to peek into the future. But before you even think about the divine insights, there's the not-so-small matter of getting there. Travel alone could be a Herculean effort. If you were visiting Delphi, for instance, the trek might take days, whether you were trudging on foot, riding a horse, or navigating the seas. And let's be real, not everyone had their own Pegasus parked out back. Now, while you're on this epic journey, you're going to need food, shelter, and maybe a sturdy pair of sandals. All these expenses start to stack up faster than a game of Tetris. But the journey was just the prelude to the real spendfest, the consultation itself. Think of it as the cover charge for the most exclusive club of the ancient world. Upon arriving at Delphi, you'd better have your drachmas ready. Consulting the oracle wasn't a simple in-and-out operation. It required a series of rituals, each with its own price tag. First came the preliminary sacrifices. Picture this: a line of anxious petitioners, each with livestock in tow, ready to offer up their best goat or sheep in hopes of sweetening the god's mood. The cost of a sacrificial animal varied, but it was certainly more than a few pennies and might have cost the equivalent of a month's wages for a labourer. Then there were the fees for the priests and temple staff. These folks weren't volunteering their weekends out of the goodness of their hearts. They needed to eat too, and they had a penchant for the finer things in life. According to some sources, the actual consultation fee could be several drachmas, which might not sound like much until you remember that the average wage for a skilled worker was just a drachma a day. But what about the gifts? Ah yes, the tokens of appreciation, or, as we might more cynically call them, bribes. The more lavish your gift, the better your chances of having your question answered. It was like bringing an apple to the teacher, except this apple might be a gold cup or a finely crafted statue. For the wealthier clients, presenting a gift was less about appeasing the gods and more about ensuring you got a prime spot in the queue. Once you finally stood before the Pythia, the high priestess, your question would be posed, and you'd receive your prophecy in the form of a riddle wrapped in an enigma. It was like getting a prize at the bottom of a cereal box. Only you had to crack the code to figure out whether it meant fame and fortune or doom and disaster. So, why did so many fork over their hard-earned drachmas for what boiled down to an ancient guessing game? The answer lies in the power dynamics of the time. Oracles wielded immense influence. In a world where gods were believed to meddle in every aspect of life, from the outcome of wars to the success of a harvest, having divine guidance was akin to having the ultimate insider information. Leaders, generals, and even entire city-states hung on the Pythia's every word. A favourable prophecy could rally troops, sway public opinion, or secure political alliances. Think of it as an ancient PR campaign with the gods as your endorsers. The political clout of oracles was such that their pronouncements could tip the scales of power, making them indispensable to those in charge. Yet, for all the grandeur and solemnity, there was an element of theatre to the whole affair. The smoke, the chants, the mysterious utterances. It was a spectacle designed to inspire awe and, perhaps, keep people from looking too closely at the man behind the curtain. While we might shake our heads at the idea of spending a fortune on cryptic riddles, it's worth remembering that the appeal of certainty, or at least the illusion of it, hasn't faded. Even today we see echoes of this ancient practice in everything from stock market predictions to weather forecasts. The human desire to know what the future holds is as enduring as it is unattainable. As we ponder the economics of oracles, we must also ask ourselves, what price would we pay for reassurance, especially in uncertain times? And how much are we influenced by those who claim to have all the answers, even if their wisdom is as murky as a Delphic prophecy? The story of the oracles is as much a tale of human nature as it is of divine intervention, a reminder that, in the end, it's often the questions we ask, rather than the answers we receive, that shape our destinies. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the fascinating world of ancient Greek oracles. Next up, we'll delve into the social fabric of the time and how these mystical institutions fit into the broader tapestry of Greek life. But for now, ponder this. If you had lived in those times, would you have made the pilgrimage to Delphi, clutching your best goat, in search of the gods' favour? Or would you have stayed home, sceptical of the whole divine charade? As we ponder the prospect of making that arduous trek to Delphi, goats in tow, let's shift our focus to the spectacle that awaited those who dared to venture into the heart of the oracle's domain. Forget any notions of a serene, meditative retreat. Imagine instead something closer to a supernatural circus, complete with smoke, chants, and an air of mystery thick enough to slice with a sacrificial knife. This was ancient theatre at its finest, designed to dazzle and intimidate in equal measure. Central to this grand performance was the Pythia, the high priestess of Delphi, whose role was less about quiet reflection and more about channeling the divine with the fervour of a rock star on an amphitheatre stage. The Pythia sat upon a tripod over a chasm in the temple floor, supposedly inhaling vapours that rose from the earth. These fumes, which some modern scholars suggest might have been ethylene gas or a similar substance, were believed to induce a trance-like state. Picture it, a priestess swaying, eyes glazed, spouting pronouncements that could make or break empires. It wasn't just prophecy, it was performance art with a side of chemical enhancement. Theatrics aside, the Pythia's utterances were famously cryptic, a kind of ancient Greek Mad Libs where the blanks were filled in by the gods themselves. This ambiguity was no accident. By keeping her statements open to interpretation, the Pythia ensured that no matter the outcome, her words could always be spun into a narrative that fit. It was like celestial insurance against being wrong. Need proof? Consider the tale of Themistocles, who received a prophecy that Athens would be saved by wooden walls. The interpretation? A naval strategy using ships as those walls. And wouldn't you know it, that strategy paid off against the Persians. Divine foresight or clever human ingenuity? The line was as blurry as a Pythia in full trance mode. But not everyone was buying what the Pythia was selling. Enter the skeptics, those brave souls who dared to question whether these divine messages were just smoke and mirrors. One such voice was that of the philosopher Xenophanes, who critiqued the anthropomorphic gods of Greek religion and, by extension, the oracles who claimed to speak for them. He argued that if animals had gods, they'd look like animals, suggesting that the gods were a human invention. Talk about a mic drop in ancient philosophical circles. Skepticism also found its way into popular culture. The playwright Aristophanes, in his comedy The Knights, poked fun at the oracular process, suggesting that the Pythia's prophecies were less about divine inspiration and more about political manipulation. His satire was a reminder that even in a world steeped in religious belief, people weren't entirely blind to the potential for human meddling in the affairs of the divine. Behind the smoke and drama, there was a practical side to these rituals. The temple operated like a well-oiled machine, with priests, attendants, and scribes all playing their part in the prophetic production line. This wasn't just a spiritual experience, it was a bureaucratic marvel with a dash of divine flair. The organization was necessary, given the sheer volume of visitors, each one hoping for a piece of the sacred action. And let's not forget the economic boost these pilgrimages brought to the region. Local merchants, innkeepers and craftsmen all benefited from the influx of seekers, making the oracle not just a religious centre, but an economic powerhouse. Yet, for all the drama and spectacle, there was a darker undertone to the whole affair. The power wielded by the oracle could be both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it offered a sense of certainty in an uncertain world, a divine nod that could justify decisions and calm anxious minds. On the other hand, it held the potential for manipulation, by those interpreting the messages, by those paying for favourable outcomes, and by those who saw in the oracle an opportunity to sway public opinion. In many ways, the oracles were the original spin doctors, their pronouncements shaping narratives and influencing events in ways that modern media moguls would admire. Their influence was such that even the skeptics, those who saw through the theatrical veneer, couldn't entirely dismiss the power of the oracle's words. It was a testament to the human desire for meaning, for certainty, and for the comfort that comes from believing in something greater than oneself. As we delve deeper into the rituals and theatrics of ancient Greek oracles, we find a world where the lines between faith and theatre, between divine insight and human manipulation, were as fluid as the vapours that enshrouded the Pythia. It was a world where the quest for knowledge and reassurance often came with a price, both literal and metaphorical. And as we continue this journey, we must ask ourselves, in our own quest for certainty, how often do we find ourselves swayed by the spectacle, the drama, and the promise of answers that may be as elusive as the gods themselves? Stay with us as we continue to unravel the fascinating tapestry of ancient Greek life, where oracles played a pivotal role in shaping not just individual destinies, but the course of history itself. As we venture further into the labyrinth of ancient Greek oracles, it's time to flip the script and take a hard look at the myths that encase these mystical institutions like a layer of divine Teflon. The allure of oracles was undeniable, but if we're being honest, a fair bit of their accuracy might have been more about strategic spin than genuine prophecy. Oracles were, in many ways, the original masters of public relations. Take the famous prediction given to King Croesus of Lydia: if you cross the Halys River, a great empire will fall. It sounds profound, right? Until you realize that it's as vague as a weather forecast from a fortune cookie. Croesus took the bait, crossed the river, and, drumroll please, ended up demolishing his own empire. The oracle was right, technically. But that's like predicting someone will find love on a reality TV show. Bound to happen, but not necessarily for the reasons you think. These ambiguous prophecies were the oracle's bread and butter. They worked because they could be interpreted in multiple ways, no matter the outcome. If things went south, you misinterpreted the gods. If you succeeded, the oracle was a genius. It was a win-win scenario, except for anyone looking for a straight answer. Oracles were essentially playing a sophisticated game of prophecy poker, always keeping their cards close to their chests. Let's not forget the legendary prediction regarding the Battle of Salamis, where the Pythia advised the Athenians to put their faith in wooden walls. Now, was she talking about ships, or perhaps a literal wall? It was up to the Athenians to interpret, and interpret they did, opting for a naval strategy. Spoiler alert, it worked. The Persians got a sound thrashing at sea, and the oracle got another notch on her mystical belt. But was this divine foresight, or just a clever manipulation of circumstances? You be the judge. Of course, not all predictions were hits. In fact, some were downright misses that would make even a weatherman blush. There's the tale of the Spartan king Leonidas, who was told Sparta would either lose a king or face destruction. Well, Leonidas did die heroically at Thermopylae, which technically fulfilled the prophecy. But Sparta didn't exactly crumble either. So, was this a prophetic success or a lucky guess? In the world of oracles, clarity was often in short supply. Social and political dynamics also played a massive role in how these divine decrees were interpreted and acted upon. Oracles were deeply embedded in the power structures of the time. They were consulted on everything from political alliances to military campaigns, and their influence could shift the balance of power. Saying the right thing at the right time could make or break a ruler's career. And for the Pythia, whose pronouncements were often dictated by the priestly class, there was always a risk of becoming a mouthpiece for political agendas. Oracles could be swayed, not just by divine will, but by human hands with very earthly concerns. Take the case of the Athenian general Alcibiades, who allegedly bribed the Delphic oracle to get a favorable prophecy. Talk about stacking the divine deck. When the stakes were high enough, it seems even the gods could be persuaded to look the other way. And let's not ignore the role of economics in the oracle game. The temples weren't just religious centres, they were bustling hubs of commerce. The influx of pilgrims brought wealth and prosperity to the regions surrounding oracular sites. It was a symbiotic relationship. The oracles needed the patronage, and the local economies thrived on the continuous stream of visitors. This economic boost was no small matter. It affected everything from local markets to the price of livestock used in sacrifices. In this divine economy, The gods were not just worshipped, they were part of the business plan. Yet for all the smoke and mirrors, oracles held a mirror to human nature, a desire for certainty, for assurance that the gods were on your side. In a world where divine favor was seen as crucial to success, the oracle's word offered comfort, even if it was wrapped in riddles. People were willing to pay dearly for that comfort, in drachmas and in belief. As we pause to consider these ancient spin doctors, we must ask ourselves, how much of what we believe is shaped by those who claim to have insight into the unknown? The oracles remind us that in the quest for certainty, we're often willing to overlook the ambiguity, to accept the spectacle, and to allow the narrative to be shaped by those who hold the megaphone. So, as we continue our journey into the enigmatic world of ancient Greece, remember this: the oracles may have spoken for the gods, but it was humans who decided what those words would mean. Stay tuned as we explore further, peeling back the layers of myth and reality to uncover the intricate dance between divine guidance and human ambition. And so, as we navigate through the fog of incense and the echoes of cryptic pronouncements, we find ourselves pondering the indelible mark left by the oracles on the canvas of history. Their legacy, surprisingly resilient, has seeped into modern culture in ways that might make even the Pythia raise an eyebrow. First off, let's talk about horoscopes, those daily nuggets of celestial wisdom that we secretly peek at while pretending to scoff. The fascination with astrology is hardly a modern quirk. It's a direct descendant of the ancient Greek penchant for divine guidance. The idea that the stars could somehow map out our lives, offering a celestial GPS for the soul, is as ancient as the hills. Ancient Greeks peered into the heavens with the same hope that today's horoscope readers do, seeking patterns, predictions, and perhaps a hint of reassurance that someone or something has a plan. Mediums and psychics, too, owe a debt to the oracles. The allure of someone claiming to bridge the gap between this world and the next remains as potent as ever. In a way, modern mediums are the Pythias of today, offering insights wrapped in mystery, albeit without the benefit of a divine scriptwriter. The human desire for answers, especially when it comes to the unknowable, hasn't faded. Instead, it's adapted to fit the times. The setting may have changed from the temple at Delphi to a glitzy psychic hotline, but the act of seeking remains the same, a testament to our eternal quest for meaning. This enduring curiosity about the future, even when the returns on investment are more speculative than a tech startup, speaks volumes about human nature. We're hardwired to search for patterns, to find connections in the chaos. It's a survival mechanism, really, an attempt to make sense of a world that often seems governed by randomness. The oracles offered a semblance of order, a way to impose narrative on the unpredictable. And that, dear listener, is a craving that's as ancient as it is modern. Of course, the oracles were more than just mystical messengers. They were societal glue, binding communities together in a shared ritual of belief, in times of uncertainty and chaos. And let's be real, ancient Greece was not exactly a model of stability. The oracles provided a touchstone. Their pronouncements offered a framework for understanding the world, a divine commentary on the unfolding drama of human life. They were the ultimate societal barometer, gauging the temperature of public sentiment and reflecting it back through the prism of divine wisdom. In an era where city-states were as likely to battle each other as band together, the oracles served as a rare unifying force. Their influence transcended borders, drawing people from all corners of the Hellenic world. Consulting an oracle was a communal act, a shared experience that transcended individual concerns and linked people in a web of collective belief. It was like attending a concert where the main act was the gods themselves, and everyone was tuned in to the same cosmic frequency. This role as societal glue is not so distant from the function of modern institutions of belief and guidance. Today, we gather around shared narratives, whether religious, scientific, or cultural, to find meaning and connection. The mediums might have changed, but the message remains the same. In a world rife with uncertainty, humans seek grounding, a sense of belonging, and the reassurance that they are not alone in their quest for answers. And yet, for all their grandeur and impact, the oracles remind us of the fine line between faith and folly. The allure of certainty is powerful, but as the Greeks discovered, the price of seeking it can be steep. The lessons of the oracles are cautionary tales about the limits of human understanding and the dangers of over-reliance on those who claim to have all the answers. They teach us that while the quest for knowledge is noble, it must be tempered with a healthy dose of skepticism. As we wrap up our exploration of the oracles, let's leave with this thought. Humans have always sought guidance from the stars, from the gods, from anything that offers a glimpse beyond the veil of uncertainty. It's a journey driven by hope, by fear, and by the unyielding desire to make sense of the unpredictable dance of life. The oracles, with all their drama and mystery, were part of that journey, a poignant reminder that in our search for certainty, the most profound answers might just lie within the questions we ask. And there you have it, an ancient story with modern echoes, a testament to the timeless nature of our quest for understanding. Whether through the cryptic words of a Pythia or the daily musings of a horoscope, the search continues. History, as it turns out, is less about the past and more about the ever-present human desire to find our way through the stars. So, as you drift off to sleep, ponder this. In the grand scheme of things, perhaps the oracles were onto something. Maybe the future isn't about knowing what lies ahead, but embracing the mystery of not knowing, finding peace in the journey itself. Susan B. Anthony entered the world in 1820, a year when the US was still figuring out what on earth it was doing with itself. Born in Adams, Massachusetts, Anthony was the second of 7 children in a household that was about as Quaker as oatmeal. Now, if you're thinking the Quakers were a bunch of peace-loving folks who wore funny hats and spoke in these and thous, you're not entirely wrong. But there's more to them than just their quaint vocabulary and fashion sense. Quakers, or the Religious Society of Friends, if you're feeling formal, were all about equality and pacifism. They believed everyone had an inner light and were big fans of both gender equality and abolitionism. In other words, they were social justice warriors before it was cool. Anthony's parents, Daniel and Lucy, were like a tag team of activism. Daniel Anthony was a cotton manufacturer who had the audacity to pay his workers based on their productivity, regardless of gender, which was practically heresy in the early 19th century. Lucy, on the other hand, was busy running the household and instilling in young Susan a sense of justice sharper than a porcupine's quills. The Anthonys even ran an underground railroad station, helping enslaved people flee to freedom. Talk about having activism in your DNA. In this cocoon of activism, Susan didn't just learn her ABCs, she got a crash course in social justice. And it wasn't long before she got her first taste of public speaking. Picture young Susan, aged 17, standing in front of a Quaker congregation, delivering a speech on the evils of alcohol. It was a temperance meeting, and Susan, true to her Quaker roots, was staunchly against the demon drink. She boldly declared that alcohol was the root of all evil. Well, at least one of them. This was 1837, a time when public speaking by women was about as common as honest politicians. Yet there she was, defying norms and making her voice heard. It was her first foray into activism, and it sparked a fire that would burn for decades. But let's not dress up young Susan as some sort of unblemished saint. Like any other teenager, she had her share of youthful misadventures. One particularly amusing tale involved Susan and her siblings borrowing a neighbour's sleigh for a joyride. No, they didn't have parental permission, and yes, they got caught. But instead of a grounding, their father decided that the lesson in personal responsibility was punishment enough. After all, the Quakers weren't big on corporal punishment. It was probably more effective to let the weight of a disappointed father hang in the air like a thick fog. It's easy to mythologize Anthony as a hero from birth, but the truth is she was a product of her environment, shaped by the values and actions of her family. The Anthony household wasn't just a family, it was practically an incubator for reformist ideals. The family moved to Battenville, New York, when Susan was 6, bringing their activist fervor with them. By the time she was in her 20s, Susan had become a schoolteacher, earning the princely sum of $110 a year, less than her male counterparts, of course. This inequality wasn't lost on her. It was another log on the fire of her burgeoning feminist consciousness. So, what do we make of this early chapter in Susan B. Anthony's life? She wasn't just a product of her time, she was a challenge to it. Her Quaker upbringing gave her a foundation in equality and justice, but it was her own experiences, like getting paid peanuts compared to men, that stoked her activism into a full-blown inferno. Her early speeches were the building blocks of a voice that would one day demand not just attention, but change. And thus, with a quick sleigh ride and a few public speeches under her belt, Susan B. Anthony was on her way to becoming one of the most formidable figures in American history. Her youthful antics and early activism combined to create a woman who would not just ask for equality, but demand it, shaking the very foundations of society with her insistence that women, too, deserved a seat at the table. The ink was barely dry on the chapters of Susan's early life when she found herself swept up in the temperance movement of the 1840s. Now, the temperance movement might sound like a quaint group of folks just trying to curb the nation's love affair with booze, but in reality, it was a battleground for social change. Here's the kicker. The movement was largely powered by women who, paradoxically, couldn't even vote on the laws they were advocating for. Ironic, right? It was like trying to steer a ship while being locked below deck. Yet there they were, with Susan B. Anthony at the helm, trying to navigate the stormy seas of societal reform. The temperance movement was more than just a crusade against the bottle. It was a response to the rampant alcohol abuse that left many families in tatters. Men drank like fish, and women, who bore the brunt of domestic chaos and financial instability, were expected to grin and bear it. It's no wonder that women fueled this movement. They were tired of picking up the pieces. And so Susan, with her Quaker-instilled sense of justice, joined the fray. By 1848, she had become a key figure in the Daughters of Temperance, using her voice to shake the rafters at meetings where women were, quite literally, trying to save their homes from the wreckage of alcohol. But make no mistake, Susan wasn't content with just temperance. The more she stood on those platforms, the more she realized that the problem wasn't just alcohol, it was systemic inequality. Women couldn't vote, own property, or even wear pants without causing a scandal. It was a rigged game, and Susan was determined to change the rules. Her time with the temperance movement was like a gateway drug to a deeper addiction, women's rights. The injustice was clearer than ever, and Susan was ready to tackle it head-on. And then, like the universe throwing her a lifeline, along came Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Where Susan was the disciplined tactician, Stanton was the visionary with a flair for the dramatic. Their meeting was less of a collision and more of a cosmic alignment. Imagine two forces of nature coming together like a thunderstorm and a hurricane deciding to team up. Stanton, born with a silver pen in her hand, had a knack for crafting the kind of speeches that could move mountains, or at least sway a few hundred people in a room. The two women met in 1851, introduced by mutual friend Amelia Bloomer. Yes, the one who gave the world bloomers, the pants, not the flowers. Their partnership was the stuff of legends, but it was also delightfully human. They were like the original odd couple. Stanton, with her brood of 7 children, was the quintessential multitasking mother, while Susan, who never married, had a single-minded focus that could bore through steel. Stanton would write, and Susan would deliver, like a well-oiled machine of reform. But their collaboration wasn't without its quirks. Stanton was known to jokingly refer to Susan as the Napoleon of the women's rights movement. And if you're imagining a tiny general with a penchant for dramatic flair, you wouldn't be far off. Susan, on the other hand, called Stanton my better half politically, of course. Together, they orchestrated what would become known as the Susan and Elizabeth Show, travelling from town to town, rallying women to the cause. If public speaking was an art, these two were the Rembrandts of rhetoric. They knew how to work a crowd using humour and pathos like a maestro conducting an orchestra. Susan would often recount tales of injustice with a dry wit that left audiences both laughing and incensed. And Stanton? She had a way of weaving narratives that made even the most hardened skeptics stop and think. Their dynamic was electric and their impact undeniable. Their efforts weren't without challenges, though. In a society that feared change like the plague, their ideas were often met with hostility. They faced hecklers, threats, and the kind of vitriol that would make modern internet trolls look like choir boys. Yet they pressed on, fueled by the belief that justice was not just a lofty ideal, but a tangible goal worth every ounce of their energy. The economic realities they faced were harsh. Women earned a fraction of what men did, and often their wages were controlled by fathers or husbands. It was a financial straitjacket, and Susan knew that economic independence was as crucial as the right to vote. She argued that true equality meant having the ability to earn and manage one's own money. Her own experience as a teacher, earning a meager $110 a year, was a constant reminder of the inequity she was up against. The temperance movement may have been Susan's starting block, but it was women's suffrage that became her marathon. The stakes were high and the opposition fierce, but Susan's resolve was as unyielding as bedrock. The fight for the vote became her life's work, with Stanton by her side, and together they laid the groundwork for a revolution that would outlast them both. And so, with the winds of change at their backs, Susan and Stanton forged ahead, carving a path through the dense forest of discrimination. Their friendship was more than just a partnership. It was a testament to the power of collaboration in the face of adversity. As they crisscrossed the country, their message resonated like a bell tolling in the night, calling women to arms, not with weapons, but with words, wit, and an unwavering belief in their cause. But let's not get too comfortable. The road ahead was still long and fraught with challenges. Susan and Stanton knew they had miles to go before they could rest. Their legacy was just beginning to take shape, and the fire they ignited would burn long after they were gone. They were, in every sense, the architects of change, building a future that, while not yet realized, was inching ever closer to fruition. Stay tuned, because the story of Susan B. Anthony is far from over, and the next chapter is bound to be as riveting as the last. As Susan and Stanton continued their relentless campaign, the world around them braced for change like a cat on a hot tin roof. By 1869, the stage was set for a seismic shift. It was the year the dynamic duo, with their eyes firmly set on the prize, founded the National Women's Suffrage Association, NWSA. Now, this wasn't some tea party with polite conversation over crumpets. It was a full-throttle assault on the status quo. Let's talk about the NWSA. This wasn't just a club for discussing the latest in bonnet fashion. This was a political powerhouse aimed squarely at amendment number. The organisation was born from a split in the suffrage movement, driven by a disagreement over the 15th Amendment, which granted African American men the right to vote but left women out in the cold. The NWSA took the bold step of focusing exclusively on women's suffrage, and their strategy was as aggressive as a caffeine-fueled squirrel. Picture the political landscape of the time, a patchwork quilt of chaos. The US had just survived a civil war, and now Reconstruction was trying to stitch the country back together. In this environment, asking for women's voting rights was like trying to sell ice cream in a snowstorm. But Susan and her comrades weren't deterred. They saw the 14th and 15th Amendments as stepping stones, not stumbling blocks. If the Constitution could be amended to expand rights for some, why not all? So, the NWSA hit the ground running, organising petitions, rallies and conventions that made the political establishment sweat in their starched collars. They were like a band of merry rebels, and Susan was their fearless leader, wielding her rhetoric like a sword. She spoke with the kind of conviction that could make a statue sit up and take notice. Her speeches were peppered with humour and logic, delivered with a precision that left no room for rebuttal. One of her favourite lines? "Failure is impossible." It was a rallying cry that resonated with women across the nation, transforming doubt into determination. But let's not kid ourselves, this was no easy ride. The opposition was as thick as molasses in January. Some politicians argued that giving women the vote would ruin the sanctity of the home, as if casting a ballot would suddenly turn them into fire-breathing dragons. There were seriously debated laws that would make your head spin. For instance, some argued that women's brains were too feeble to understand the complexities of politics. Really? This was a time when women managed households, raised children, and often contributed to family businesses, yet somehow deciding between candidates was considered beyond their mental capacity. Then there was the myth of Susan B. Anthony as a quaint, harmless figure, a myth as misleading as a map drawn by a toddler. The truth? Susan was a strategic genius. She knew that changing laws required more than just fiery speeches. It needed a chess master's touch. She meticulously planned campaigns, like a general preparing for battle, understanding that each state victory was a stepping stone to a national triumph. Her ability to network was legendary, cultivating relationships with politicians who could be allies or at least not enemies. In fact, her mind was so sharp that it could slice through the most tangled political webs. Yet, despite her brilliance, Susan was often portrayed as a spinster with a single-minded obsession, devoid of personal charm. It's true she never married, but it wasn't for lack of suitors. Her life was dedicated to a cause greater than herself, a commitment that left little room for traditional domesticity. She wasn't just a woman of her time, she was a woman ahead of it. While Susan and her co-conspirators ruffled feathers, the economic context of the era added another layer of complexity. Women were entering the workforce in greater numbers, filling roles left vacant by men who went off to war. But the wage gap was about as wide as the Grand Canyon. Women were paid a pittance, often half of what their male counterparts earned for the same work. Susan knew that economic independence was the bedrock of true equality. She wasn't just asking for the vote. She was demanding a fair shake at life itself. And let's not forget the social obstacles. Women's suffrage wasn't just a political issue, it was a cultural revolution. Society had long pigeonholed women into roles that were as rigid as corsets. The idea that women could participate in politics was as shocking as wearing trousers in public. Susan and her compatriots were challenging centuries of tradition, and tradition wasn't about to go quietly into that good night. Despite these hurdles, the NWSA made significant strides. They lobbied Congress, submitted petitions with thousands of signatures, and held conventions that drew large crowds. Their persistence began to pay off, with the first victories in western states like Wyoming and Utah, where women gained the right to vote in the late 1860s and early 1860s. These victories were like the first cracks in a dam, hinting at the flood to come. However, the fight was far from over. The NWSA faced criticism not only from outside, but sometimes from within the suffrage movement itself. There were disagreements on strategy and tactics, with some advocating for a more conservative approach, and others, like Susan, pushing for bold action. It was a delicate balancing act, like walking a tightrope while juggling flaming torches. Through it all, Susan remained steadfast. Her vision was clear, her dedication unshakable. She was, in every sense, the engine driving the movement forward, refusing to let inertia slow her down. Her life was a testament to the power of resilience, a reminder that change is not a sprint, but a marathon requiring endurance and tenacity. As we leave this chapter, it's essential to remember that while Susan B. A. Anthony is a celebrated figure today, her journey was fraught with challenges that would have deterred a lesser spirit. She wasn't just fighting for the vote, she was fighting for a future where women could stand as equals, with voices that mattered and choices that counted. Her story is far from over, and as we look to the next part, the path she forged continues to inspire those who dare to challenge the status quo. Stay tuned, because the revolution is just getting started, and the best is yet to come. The story of Susan B. Anthony was barreling forward like a steam engine with no brakes, and the next stop was her infamous brush with the law in 1872. If you were expecting her to quietly fade into the wallpaper of history, you'd be as mistaken as someone trying to find a phone booth in 2023. Nope, Susan was about to throw a political hand grenade into the genteel drawing rooms of America, and it all started with one audacious act, casting a vote. It was November 5th, 1872, when Susan decided it was high time someone called out the grand hypocrisy of a nation that touted liberty and justice for all, except, women. So she marched herself down to the voting booth in Rochester, New York, and cast her ballot for Ulysses S. Grant. Now, let's pause for a moment to appreciate the audacity of the act. This was a time when women voting was about as welcome as a fox in a henhouse. Susan knew she was breaking the law, but she also knew that sometimes the law has to be broken to be fixed. She was challenging the system with all the subtlety of a cannonball. Susan didn't act alone either. She rallied a group of women, 14 in total, to join her in this political insurrection. They were like a band of suffragette outlaws, armed with ballots instead of bullets. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't just a stunt. It was a calculated move in a much larger game. Susan was making a statement, planting a flag in the battleground of women's suffrage. Of course, the authorities were about as amused as a cat in a bathtub. Just 3 weeks later, Susan was arrested for her crime of having the audacity to think her opinion mattered. The charge, knowingly, wrongfully, and unlawfully voting. The absurdity of the situation was almost comical. It was like arresting a fish for swimming. But there was nothing funny about the consequences. The fine was $100, a hefty sum at the time, equivalent to about $2,200 today. But Susan? She had no intention of paying a single cent. Her response was legendary: "I shall never pay $1 of your unjust penalty." Now, let's talk about the trial, which was as much a farce as a courtroom drama. It was held in June 1873, and it had all the hallmarks of a show trial. The judge, Ward Hunt, was about as impartial as a cat in a creamery. He didn't just instruct the jury, he directed them to find her guilty. He didn't even let Susan testify on her own behalf, which was about as fair as a one-legged man in a butt-kicking contest. But Susan was no shrinking violet. She stood up and delivered a speech that was both a masterclass in rhetoric and a searing indictment of the legal system. In her address, she declared, "I am being tried by men who have no interest in my cause, who think that all women are inferior to themselves, and whose prejudices are as strong as their ignorance is profound." If you're picturing jaws dropping and molecules popping out of eyes, you wouldn't be far off. She was as relentless as a pit bull with a bone, refusing to let the injustice slide. The trial was a spectacle, a circus of contradictions, and Susan was the ringmaster. She used the opportunity to shine a spotlight on the absurdity of a system that excluded women from the democratic process while claiming to represent the will of the people. Her words were like arrows, aimed straight at the heart of inequality. "The only chance women have for justice is to violate the law, as I have done," she proclaimed, turning the courtroom into her stage and the trial into a platform for advocacy. The fallout was as explosive as you'd expect. Newspapers around the country picked up the story, and public opinion was divided like a room full of cats and dogs. Some saw Susan as a hero, a symbol of the fight for equality. Others saw her as a troublemaker, a woman who didn't know her place. But Susan didn't care about the naysayers. She was in it for the long haul, determined to see her fight through to the bitter end. And here's where the economic context comes crashing in like a tidal wave. The trial wasn't just about voting, it was about power and control. Women's economic status was tied to their lack of political representation. They were expected to work like workhorses, but had no say in the laws that governed their lives. Anthony knew that voting rights were just one piece of the puzzle. Economic independence was the other, and without both, true equality would remain a distant dream. In the end, Susan's trial was a pivotal moment, a watershed that brought the issues of women's suffrage and economic inequality into the national conversation. She may have been found guilty, but the real victory was in the awareness she raised and the spark she ignited. The absurdity of her conviction only highlighted the need for change, and Susan's resolve was as unyielding as ever. So as we leave this chapter, remember that Susan B. Anthony wasn't just a figurehead, she was a force of nature. Her arrest and trial were not setbacks but catalysts, fueling a movement that would eventually shatter the glass ceilings of her time. Her fight was far from over, and the echoes of her defiance still resonate today. Stay tuned, because the revolution she championed is rolling on, gathering steam like a freight train with no intention of stopping. So there we were, with Susan B. Anthony standing trial in 1873, her defiant spirit echoing through the annals of history, an echo that would eventually crescendo into the 19th Amendment's passage in 1920. But let's not jump too far ahead just yet. The road from Susan's audacious vote to the ratification of that amendment was as winding as a mountain trail, strewn with obstacles and, well, a few more Susan-sized boulders. Fast forward to the early 20th century. Susan had passed in 1906, leaving behind a tapestry of activism woven with threads of tenacity and defiance. Her death was a blow, but it was hardly the end of the movement. The suffragists kept the torch burning like an eternal flame. The baton was passed to a new generation of women, including the formidable Alice Paul and her National Woman's Party. Now, if you thought Susan was a force of nature, Alice was a hurricane in a skirt. She organized the 1913 Woman's Suffrage Procession in Washington, D.C., a parade that was less about pageantry and more about making a statement loud enough to wake Congress from its slumber. Meanwhile, the world was changing faster than a New York minute. The First World War was raging, and women were stepping into roles traditionally held by men, proving once again that they could do the job, and often do it better. By 1918, the irony was as thick as fog. Women were supporting the war effort, yet they still couldn't vote for the leaders sending them into the fray. President Woodrow Wilson, Ever the political chameleon, finally threw his support behind women's suffrage, recognising the absurdity of the situation, or at least recognising the potential votes. And then, like a long overdue climax in a soap opera, the 19th Amendment was passed by Congress on June 4, 1919, and ratified on August 18, 1920. It was a victory, but let's not romanticize it too much. The truth is, this wasn't a gift from the powers that be. It was a right pried from their reluctant hands. The amendment was the result of decades of relentless pressure, of women being persistently inconvenient to the status quo. Susan B. Anthony had famously said, "Failure is impossible," and she was right, though it took an infuriatingly long time for the rest of the world to catch up. Now, speaking of Susan, her posthumous reputation took on a life of its own, almost like a historical game of telephone. She became the poster child for the suffrage movement, her image sanitized into that of a kindly old aunt. The reality? She was as sharp as a tack, and as tactically shrewd as a chess grandmaster. Sure, she made it onto a coin, the Susan B. Anthony dollar, minted in 1979, but let's be honest, it was about as popular as a lead balloon. Turns out, the public wasn't quite ready for a woman on their money who knew. The coin was often mistaken for a quarter, a fitting metaphor for how her contributions were often underestimated. Susan's legacy, though, isn't just about suffrage. It's about the way she reshaped the conversation around equality, economic independence, and social justice. Her work was less a romantic crusade and more a practical blueprint for a world that didn't yet exist, but desperately needed to. She didn't just dream of change, she demanded it, in all its messy, complicated reality. Let's not forget the economic angle here. Susan understood that the right to vote was inextricably linked to financial autonomy. Without control over their economic destiny, women would remain second-class citizens. Her push for equal pay and economic rights was as relentless as her suffrage campaign. She knew that real change required more than symbolic victories. It needed tangible shifts in power dynamics. As we reflect on Susan B. Anthony's legacy, it's tempting to see her as a solitary beacon of hope. But the reality is, she was part of a vast network of women and some enlightened men who worked tirelessly to change the world. The suffrage movement was a collective effort, a reminder that while one person can spark a fire, it takes a movement to fan the flames into a blaze. In the end, Susan's story is a testament to the power of persistence. It's a reminder that history isn't just made by the bold acts of a few, but by the countless small steps taken by many. Her journey from a Quaker household to the halls of Congress was as much about her as it was about the people who walked alongside her, those who picked up the mantle and carried the fight forward. So, as we wrap up this tale of Susan B. Anthony, let's remember her not just as a face on a coin or a name in a history book, but as a testament to the power of unwavering resolve. Her life was a clarion call to challenge injustice wherever it lurks, to speak out even when silence is easier, and to never settle for anything less than full equality. Her story is timeless, a legacy that continues to inspire those who dare to dream and act beyond the confines of the possible.